It's good to have you back on Newsday. The election season in Nigeria is about to get a shot in the arm, with campaigns for next year's presidential election set to kick off next Wednesday, September the 28th. For many Nigerians, however, the electoral process will not be complete without elevating culture of presidential debate and other progressive channels for interfacing with the electorate. For an informed view from the diaspora on this matter, we are now being joined from Michigan, United States, by renowned economist and banker, Professor Chika Mordi. Great to have you with us. Now, let's talk about first the issue of presidential debate. How significant towards the 2023 polls, you think, Professor?
Good afternoon, Nate. Thank you for having me. It depends. Obviously, debates are very significant when it comes to TV debates. And there is evidence, not just within Nigeria, but especially here in the United States, that TV debates influence voters and the outcome of elections. There's a history and some tendencies that since the advent of TV debates, people tend to be influenced by what they see and hear directly from the candidates. Now, in the last electoral cycle, we didn't have that benefit of having the candidates square up, the major candidates at least, on the same debate stage. So we're hopeful that this year we could see those debates happen.
Very good, Professor. Now, people might argue with you that President Buhari more or less avoided a debate, and we have the current new governor of Osun State, despite all the challenges he had to go through, didn't also attend a debate session with the other candidates, and yet they are the helmsmen of the states. So, what do you make of that scenario?
Well, even here in the States, we're having some candidates in statewide races that have basically declined debating, and it's political strategy. So if you're ahead of the polls, if you're ahead in the polls and in your estimates, you're likely to win, and you feel a debate would weaken your position, then it's natural you'll be reticent. You're going to be reluctant to go into a debate. However, if you feel it's to your benefit or you feel you're lagging, then yes, you want to go into a debate. So people could associate the candidate with their positions, especially if it's a hot button position. So I feel the electorate is better served. It's obvious for many reasons, where they hear directly from the candidates, they can contrast their positions, and they could therefore take responsibility for their policy positions of where they stand, and they could also explain allegations or against them as well.
All right, Professor. Now let's home in on one candidate specifically, Peter Obi. Now he's open to a debate, and we haven't heard from the others. But will that guarantee success for him at the polls, you think?
Well, it'll be difficult to make that assumption. It will be a very tenuous one that participating in the debate would benefit him. It would obviously depend on how, if the debate holds, how the other candidates perform and how he's able to defend his positions and sell his candidacy. Peter Obi and the Labour Party are outsiders in terms of there are two major political parties historically, and APC and PDP. And so Labour Party and MPPs, Kwakwanso, are more like third-party candidates. So it's to their benefit to get as much publicity as possible and to also stand on the same stage with the two major candidates, because it enhances their candidacy. They're seen as major candidates, and it gives them an opportunity to also let people contrast themselves with APC, PDP. And it's not by chance I put those two names together. So Nigeria has been ruled since this advent to democracy in 1999 by these two parties. They are the two major parties. And when the public is clamoring for change, 2020 looks like a change election. It's normal to be disenchanted with the status quo. So if APC and PDP are the status quo, then any outsider, quote unquote, it's going to want to contrast with those two and hold them to the state of the nation today.
Very good, Professor. And next question is a little bit twofold here. Let's talk about the electioneering process that brought in the main candidates to the limelight, especially the monetized nature of the primaries as well. I'd like your thoughts on that. And what do you think about opinion polls on these candidates? Do we actually have the best alternatives for the electorate, you think?
So let me unpack that. There are two elements to your question. The first was about the primaries. I think when primaries are closed, in the nature of the primaries we had for both parties. So they were indirect in the sense that they elected delegates, and it wasn't open to the public as a whole. It was open to the extent that you participated in electing those delegates. This, of course, is because you had these amendments where what we used to call super delegates, right, were not allowed to be delegates this time around. So there were people who were elected by the public. Right. Now, it was obvious in the reports that we saw that a lot of money was used to induce delegates and influence their voting patterns. That is unfortunate. But we don't have any evidence that if money didn't play a role and those delegates who are left to vote their consciences, that there will be a different outcome. We could speculate on that, but it's the way the party has chosen to approach it. And so far, there have been no court judgments or legal basis of rejecting the results of those primaries. So it's as if safe assumption that it's the result that the party desired, and Nigerians will have their day where they could make their voices heard and make their ideas known about what they feel about the candidates that the parties put forward.
Very good, Professor. Yeah. Now, specifically, let's talk a little bit about the PDP. I'm sure you've been following the trends regarding the aggrieved Governor Wike and, of course, Mr. Atiku, the presidential candidate, and some of his cohorts. I'd like your thought on that. If this issue is not, being put to rest by the party and their chances for the polls, what impact do they have on the electorate?
Good question. And I feel, and linked to that also is, you spoke earlier on about polls.
Yes.
And there's a paucity of polling for this race. Indeed. It's not unusual not to have very many polls. And we could debate the not accuracy, but we could debate the usefulness of, if you like, of utility of polls. There one set of polls have been released that from a fairly credible polling agency, and we could again debate the results. But polling, a lot of the public is very skeptical about polling in Nigeria, even more than here in the US. Having said that, polling tends to be a useful indicator if it's well interpreted. And the only poll we've seen, the conclusion to which there is that majority of Nigerians have not decided or are not disclosing their voting intentions. But there's also some safe conclusion that it's going to look like a three-way race as against what used to be a two-way race. Now back to your last question about the PDP. They say 1 week is a long time in politics. Now we have something like 150 days before the elections. So a lot can happen during that period. It's obvious that PDP is not unified, and I have not coalesced around the candidacy of Alhaji Atiku Abubakar. There's still time for that to happen. This does not mean it will happen, but there is time for that. But it has very significant ramifications for the PDP and for Alhaji Atiku Abubakar in particular. If you look at the last two elections, the PDP strongholds in terms of where they've performed the best have been the South, the Southeast, and a segment of the Middle Belt. Now, it so happens that Governor Wike, and I don't want to use the word faction, they've not been factionalized, but Governor Wike and his supporters are pretty influential in those zones. And so if you look at the 11 million votes that Alhaji Atiku Abubakar got in 2019, and you take away large portions from the South and Southeast and Middle Belt, it would definitely not be competitive. So it plays to the benefit of the APC and maybe the Labour Party should PDP not coalesce around this candidacy. But it's speculation at this point. There's time to go. It doesn't look pretty. If I was a PDP sympathizer, I'll be very nervous at the moment and would sue for some form of peace and unity in the party.
And of course, the other parties are not just standing by, they will try and capitalize on that issue, Professor. Now, let's take a look at the issue of vote buying. It's not a new phenomenon. It's been going on for years now in Nigeria's political landscape. Now we're still having issues like that creeping in and the possibility of that not being eroded for some time to come. Now, economically speaking, how is that having impact on voter choice and the electorate's free will, to get the job done and elect people of their choice?
It has an impact, especially in a country where more than 2/3 of the population is living on less than $1.25 a day. So it might, to you and I, it might look, we look at this and say, well, anyone accept 1,000 or 2,000 naira and vote for a candidate who is more likely actually to worsen their lot going forward. But when you're really poor, today the immediacy is so critical. Your next meal matters a lot more than your welfare in 3 years in your mind. So it's illegal to buy votes. The laws have not been enforced diligently. If they were, then the practice will be discouraged. Now, there are some signs, there's some positive signs that the nature of the elections and how the results will be aggregated, it reduces the room for shenanigans and manipulation. So there's some hope that we might have a more transparent, more credible election than 2019. Of course, we saw the last 3 off-cycle elections in Anambra, Osun, and Ekiti looked more transparent. But historically, if you go back to 4 years earlier on, these elections were also transparent because it's a lot easier to put in security agents and to focus intensely when you have a single state. When you have elections in 36 states simultaneously, it's far more difficult to have the same level of scrutiny and intensity and dissuasion for malignant political actors.
Indeed, Professor. Still talking about scrutiny here. Let's talk a little bit about the issue of INEC's Electoral Act, in view of the challenges at bay here. Do you think INEC itself should bear sole responsibility for curbing voter buying, as it were, has been suggested by some people? The economic situation of the country is still a matter to be addressed, and people, like you said, are still looking for their next meal.
Mm-hmm. Well, very often the most, if you like, in terms of efficacy, the most efficacious solution to this sort of things is transparency. If you shine a lot of light, then corruption withers, in the obvious of that. So if INEC alone doesn't have the resources to enforce this, but the government, the federal government, does have the resources to enforce that. And we could think about long-term ways of influencing the thinking around that. But today, with sufficient resources, you could track down, punish, dissuade people who want to buy votes. And if there are consequences for those actions, top of which is that they don't get into elected office, then it will serve as a powerful disincentive for them.
Very good. And I'm sure you're also monitoring the issues with the INEC's Electoral Act, and more changes are brought in to at least give more bite to the transparency of the election. So what are your thoughts for that? Does it actually need more empowerment from the National Assembly as well?
As at least prima facie, what we see on the face of it, it looks decent, looks good, but it's not sufficient. What I mean by this is, for example, take us in diaspora. We have a magnified influence in the Nigerian economy and even in the political space. Diasporic Nigerians remit something between $25 and $30 billion a year, which is by far the second largest source of foreign exchange behind oil. And in some years, it's come pretty close to oil revenue. It's also a very educated demographic, and is one that is, I would argue, very patriotic in terms of, voting for Nigeria to succeed. They're excluded when it comes to voting. It's not rocket science to integrate Nigerians in diaspora, at least in certain countries, in terms of the voting system. And they could go to locations and vote, and they could register as well. It's very, very easy, much easier than even in Nigeria, to get an agency to register diaspora Nigerians in North America and in Europe. I feel that part of the act was a major opportunity to have incorporated diasporans. That is a failing of the act. And the numbers are significant. So given the kind of low turnout we've seen since probably 1999, the numbers here, having 1 million or a couple of million or 3 million people, is enough to swing the outcome of an election. And like I said, they have a very strong vested interest.
Indeed, you're right. It's not rocket science when it comes to having a positive outlook for INEC and for the elections. Professor Chika Mordi of Johns Hopkins University, it's been a pleasure having you on the show. It's good to have you.